We wish to advise that the following program, Mailer on Picasso, is rated M for mature audiences and contains frank sexual references.
On tonight's South Bank show, two great 20th century contenders, Norman Mailer and Pablo Picasso. Hello. Since Norman Mailer first blasted onto the scene with the novel The Naked and the Dead 50 years ago, he's been at the centre of American literary life. Provocative, his enemies call him self-aggrandizing, he's attacked the big themes of the century in nearly 30 books of fiction, speculation, essays and journalism. Now, at the age of 73, he's turned his attention to Pablo Picasso. Picasso is, for Mailer, the ultimate 20th century artist, difficult, unpredictable, constantly reinventing himself. It's with this urge that Mailer identifies, seeing Picasso at his most heroic in the radical style of Cubism that he developed with George Braque in the early years of the century. Mailer believes art must take risks and feels that as a novelist he can bring insights to Picasso that have eluded previous critics or biographers. There are other similarities in their careers. Both have suffered the vagaries of fashion. Picasso had 7 serious marriages and affairs, Mailer has had 6. But above all, both men share an artistic fascination with sex. Mailer calls his book an interpretive biography, and it concentrates on Picasso as a young man. It's characteristically outspoken, and we went to talk to him at his house on Cape Cod, where he wrote the book. What drew you to Picasso as a subject in the first place, Norman?
You know, I wanted to do a book about him 30 years ago. So I must have looked at more than 10,000 prints of his stuff. I ended up writing the only philosophy I've ever written. Nothing to do with Picasso. He just sent me off into the Empyrean. And all through the years I kept thinking, well, why didn't I ever do that book on him? And I do understand this man. I understand something about him that the others don't.
And you've been here, what, 30 years? It must be a great place to write.
It's terrific for writing. It just absolutely, you can't improve on it.
Of course, our man that we're going to talk about, Picasso, there were all those photographs of him frolicking in the sea, but I discovered he couldn't swim.
That's right, he couldn't swim. He used to get in the water, and he'd bend over like this, and he'd sort of go like that. You see? And that was, and he'd pretend he was swimming, and grinning at the camera as he's swimming. And he wasn't fundamentally macho. He went boxing once because he loved boxing.
Just the once.
And so I think he got hit once and that was it. This obviously wasn't good for his art. So,
do you feel you have a kinship with him? Do you see Picasso as...
Half kinship. You know, if we'd been cellmates together in a prison, I don't think we would have liked each other. He was a very selfish man, and I'm selfish enough. I don't think we would have gotten along necessarily. But I did feel a kinship with him in that I thought there's certain similarities in our lives that are striking to me.
Sure.
And one of them is he was recognized very early. And of course, I know a little about that. And also, he was a little too small, physically speaking, for his role. Well, that I also know something about. And so I thought, I really, most of the people who write about him see him as this artist who's completely in command and in control of his life. They don't understand that there's much more to an artist than just willing to do something, deciding this is the direction to go and this is what I'm going to do. You know, we fumble. We don't always know if we're going in the right direction. Some of the best things I've ever done, I remember I was just steeped in depression in the first months of writing it because I thought I was going in the wrong direction.
Do you think that there's a kinship? I mean, you've attacked your work in different ways. You've written novels, you've written essays, you've written plays, you've gone at it with films, you've written journalism. Do you feel, I mean, Picasso kept coming at it in a different way, didn't he?
Well, that was part of the kinship.
Yeah,
very much
that's
part
what
of
I'm
it.
saying, yeah.
In that I felt that, in a way, he gave me sanction. All through the years, whenever I would say, well, I just don't have a style the way Hemingway does, or Faulkner does, or I'm not, or Steinbeck. I don't. People can't depend on something from me. Every book I do is different. And then I thought, well, but that's what Picasso did all his life. And so, as I say, it opened the way for me. And I was grateful to him for showing me something, which is that reality as a huge mountain, each style enabled you to go up a different face of that mountain. And that was what Picasso was always doing. He was attacking the nature of reality.
And also the attraction of the outlaw figure. And you yourself have managed, most curiously, because you're a writer that an enormous number of people know about and follow, but you've still maintained, or you still have a sort of outside figure. And he wanted that. Was there some sort of relationship you felt there?
Yeah, there too was a relationship. Well, you know, what it goes back to is he was an Andalusian.
Yeah.
And Andalusians are looked down upon by people who live in Barcelona. You know, they're considered sort of comic macho types.
They're kind of like the Irish used to be thought of in England. Really.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And by the time he got to Paris, he was looked upon the way people who are high society in New York would look upon immigrant Puerto Ricans to New York.
Yeah.
So that he had that. He was always fighting his way uphill.
And the accent was difficult for him.
He wrote an abominable French. Actually, his French was execrable.
Yeah.
It was amazingly bad. I think he was probably dyslexic because French is hard enough to spell, but no one could misspell it the way he did. and I mean, in Paris, to speak French badly, as we all know, is not the way to get ahead.
So therefore, you were dealing with somebody who you could easily reach out to. I mean, was there you called it an interpretive biography?
When I say an interpretive biography, all I meant was that I wasn't doing a great deal of original research. There's almost none. I was depending on the books I'd read and then interpreting them with my own knowledge of what I've learned in my life and so on.
I just wondered how far interpretive meant that you were using the imagination you use for creating fictional characters in talking about Picasso.
There's a difference. It's a subtle difference. You're limited. You can't just decide the way you will in a novel. Sometimes a character takes an unexpected turn, and then you go off to the races in an unforeseen. You're in a race you never figured to be in. With Picasso, after all, there's a life. There's a record of that life that's highly detailed, and so you're circumscribed, and the interpretations tend to be more in depth rather than in you know. The narrative is not what interprets the life so much as the particular moment, what you can perceive in that moment.
I would like to pick out three incidents that you describe, and you describe as being crucial. First of all, the autopsy that Picasso experienced. Why do you think that is particularly significant for him? You make quite a lot of that in your book.
He was up in Horta de Ebro, in the foothills of the mountains in Spain, north of Barcelona. And a young girl, 12-year-old girl, was killed by lightning. There was no autopsy. The local coroner did it, and he was very clumsy. The cut that was made was done vertically through the girl's skull, split her right down the middle. Picasso was watching. It was traumatic for him to a degree. He got ill. He had to leave. But I do think that became one of the fundamental turning points in Picasso's life. It's literally, if you take a twig and you break it, and the branch then grows with that in it, you've had that traumatic imprint on the tree limb, and I think it had that kind of imprint on his head. That's legitimate.
One autopsy that he saw in a country village when he was 19, a sort of clumsy.
I think it would have I saw an autopsy once when I was about 35, and I've never forgotten it. It is incredible when you suddenly realize what the inside of the body looks like. Now, to see the inside of the brain, a young girl with her head split, no, I mean, I don't see how it couldn't have had a huge effect on him. It didn't take place. The effects aren't visible immediately. They're not visible for 30 years. But he always was living with extraordinary divisions that go on in people. It's as if we have two complete personalities, two souls. That was very much part of the way he saw people. He will divide people and paint them in such a way you see the good side and the bad side. The famous portrait of the woman looking in a mirror shows that twice. The good side and the bad side, the not so good side and the very bad side. And I think this division was always present for him, and that it changed a good deal the way he looked at things for the rest of his life.
You're reinforced by what his friend and in some cases his mentor, Apollinaire, said, because at one stage, and you quote this, he said, Picasso studies an object as a surgeon dissects a cadaver.
Mm.
And so that reinforces what you're saying, doesn't it?
Well, I chose it for that reason.
Yeah, sure.
But I think Apollinaire was absolutely right. I think what it gave him, I think that splitting of the head gave Picasso a sense of the great division that exists in all people. And so he, particularly his studies of women, he starts off with these gorgeous portraits of them, of his mistresses. And then as the years go by, they get uglier and uglier and uglier as he begins to see the other side of them. Picasso was always exploring into the nature of each woman he lived with. And I think that division, very often what he started doing is he said, let's take the good side of the woman and the bad side of the woman and put them together. And did that in later years.
I believe that, from my reading, you suggest in your book that the fluidity of Picasso's early work can partly be explained by his search for sexual identity. Is that something that you are saying?
No, I wouldn't say I was saying that. I was saying that...
Because women appear in different forms in the early work. In landscapes there are women. In his erotic drawings, the women are hidden in the... or not so hidden, they're there in the testicles, and the man is the penis, and so on and so forth.
Picasso was obsessed with visual puns. There's the famous story that when he was a child he couldn't do arithmetic because the number 7 looked to him like a nose upside down. And the idea that it was a nose was much more important to him than that it was some abstract cipher that he's supposed to work with. What he would work with was the nose. This kind of nose, that kind of nose, so forth. So he was absolutely fascinated in sex with androgyny. Androgyny was fascinating to him because, on the one hand, in terms of form, a man's a man, a woman's a woman. But the deeper he got into sex and the deeper he got into opium, the more he was confused by it. You know, where is the man in oneself? Where is the woman in oneself? And he anticipates all the later studies in androgyny that have sort of permeated our half of the 20th century. He was absolutely fascinated with the idea that, I'm at a loss for words. He was fascinated with the notion that nothing was nailed down when it came to form. That as you explored through form, things turned into their opposite. And all through his life, he's going through visual puns, painting these visual puns. He delighted in having penises that spoke. You see, they look like heads. He was almost like a... But I mean, he could have been one of the great pornographers of all time. His pornographic drawings are extraordinary. They're better than anyone I know.
Another event you bring to bear quite strongly in your reading of Picasso and your writing about him is the suicide of his friend, Casagemas, who was a friend from Barcelona, who was an artist. They were very poor in Paris together, and that suicide, the nature of it, the relationship that Casagemas had with women, seems to has a big effect on Picasso, you suggest, and then you take it through. Could you just tell us about that and how it affected him and why you think it did?
Picasso and Casagemas were particularly close friends in Barcelona when they were each about 19. They went to Paris together in 1900. They had an extraordinary time there. They went with another friend from Barcelona named Palares. And the three of them moved into a loft, a studio that another painter from Barcelona had, and he gave it over to them. And they inherited the mistress that went with the loft, plus a couple others that came along. So there they were living in this wonderfully orgastic life, 3 young men, 3 young women, and interchanging all over the place. But Casagemas had always had a huge problem with impotence. And he took drugs intensely. And he was a rich, very spoiled kid with an extraordinary madness. He prided himself on how anarchistic he was, how void of all principle, how exceptional he was, how sophisticated, how fabulous. And here it was.
He engaged in criminality.
Well, he was ready for anything.
Anything, yeah.
Except there it is, man's tragedy. He was also impotent. And there are the 3 of them, 3 men, 3 women, and they're all horsing around. And he's fallen in love with one of the 3 girls, and he can't get it up. And there it is. And he started going out of his mind because he'd fallen in love with a girl named Germaine Gagayo. And Picasso decided he had to take him home to Spain before he flipped out. So he took him back. And then they went traveling together. And Casagemas got worse and worse. And at a given moment, Picasso, they were down in Malaga. And Casagemas was acting so badly that Picasso finally shipped him home to Barcelona. It was like a subtle betrayal of his friend that he didn't quite protect him, stay with him. It was getting to be too much to carry. Casagemas then went right up to Paris again, looked up Germaine Gargallo, and told her he wanted to marry her. They went out to dinner that night. She told him she could not marry him. She was already married, in fact. And in the course of the evening, he took out a gun.
In a restaurant?
In a restaurant. Took out a gun in a restaurant and fired a shot, which she hit the floor. He thought he'd killed her. She just was clever enough to hit the floor immediately the moment she saw the gun go off. And then he shot himself and died. And Picasso was absolutely unmanned by this suicide because he felt responsible for it in a dozen different ways. He went back to Paris and ended up in an affair with Germaine Gargallo. So he was doing all sorts of things at once. He was cuckolding his old friend. He was giving veneration to his old friend. That is, he was cohabiting with the widow, you might say. He was doing a lot of things at once. And in the course of it, he painted what I think is his first great painting. It's the painting of the candle and Casagemas lying
on his deathbed?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's the first great painting?
Well, first of all, it's an awfully good painting, but on top of that, it is doing so many things at once. It has the resonance and the intensity of connotation of a fine poem. It's a cluster of meanings. And also, he is entering into this preoccupation he had all his life with sexual organs, and there are many, many meanings. So the candle flame is a vagina. And there it is, that vagina, he's speaking of the vagina that created Casagemas, because he's thinking of the mother who's mourning him. So she's there, she's mourning. The candle, vagina, is mourning. It also is Germaine Gargallo, who is indirectly the instrument of all this. And then there's Casagemas himself in an extraordinary portrait of a dead man.
How do you think that this whole incident worked its way through in his own painting and attitude to his painting at the time, the Norman?
Well, it's significant that shortly after that he enters the Blue Period. And he stays in that Blue Period for 4 years. And during that period, from 1900 to 1904, a good part of 1904, his palette became blue, dark blue. Very rarely did other colors enter it at all. I think these were the worst years of his life.
And you think a direct connection with the suicide of Casagemas, do you?
Oh, I think that's a direct connection.
Yeah.
I think also that it's possible, in fact, it's highly likely that Picasso was impotent himself during this period, for large parts of it, because his drawings during these years have an extraordinary number of men who are without genitals. Their hand will be in front of their genitals, or they'll have no genitals. And the blue, the gloom of the blue is everywhere, pervades through everything. And I became a little obsessed with the idea of why does a painter stick in one color for that length of time? And it's almost as if, so long as he stays with that color, because I think when we approach psychosis, we get very totemistic. So long as he stays with the color blue, he's safe. He's safe in that he will not go crazy. But to step out, to suddenly do a red canvas would drive him out of his mind. And it's very hard to understand until you realize the intensity and the magical sincerity of color for painters. They simply colors have a life for painters that different kinds of whiskeys have for a drunk. In other words, a serious drinker will find a profound difference between bourbon, rum, and scotch. They wouldn't dream of drinking one if the other was available.
But he can't give it up for years. It's a long time, isn't it, to stay
4 years, to be painting in blue all the time when you have all that talent.
And
yes.
nobody wants the paintings. Your dealer who's brought you on turns his back. Nobody wants them. But the interesting thing is you're suggesting that the depression tamed the psychosis.
Yes. Well, that is just my supposition, my interpretation, if you will. But, look at the restriction he puts on himself. It's equal to the most talented young soccer player that comes along, who's under 20. Suddenly says, from now on, I only kick the ball with my left foot. I will not use my right foot to kick. People say, are you out of your mind? What are you doing? He says, no, this is the way I have to do it. So he was restricting himself in the most exceptional fashion.
Why did you concentrate on the young Picasso, Norman? And it's the book virtually ends with just a few pages to go when Picasso's 31. And why did you concentrate on that early period?
I think it was his greatest period. You know, I think Cubism will finally be seen as the huge contribution he made to modern art, the mammoth contribution, if you will. And that everything he did after that was a descent. Some extraordinary works, obviously, were created during the descent, and you know, you can't. This is not to mock the last 2/3 of his working life, but I felt that what I reacted to the most, what I thought was the best, were those early years, and also they're very dramatic. Those early years. He has a wonderfully interesting affair with a woman who was kind enough to write a book in French.
Very good book, actually. One feature of your book is that you quote at length from his mistress, Fernand, and it's very good stuff. You translated it yourself. That presumes that it's been rather neglected. Why so, and what do you find of interest in it?
There's an interesting history to the book. She wrote one book that's been translated into English that everyone's read who's interested in Picasso. It's called Picasso and His Friends. It's not a terribly good book. It's either good nor bad. It's anecdotal. It has some interesting stories, but it's essentially superficial. And then she wrote another book, which she completed in 1955, that was never published until 1988 in France. It's called Souvenirs Intimes. And I happened to come across it and read it, and I thought, this is wonderful, and no one's been using it. So this was the nearest I had to original research in my book, which is to English readers I could present this book, Souvenirs Intimes, and so I translated it. I translated what I needed, which was 15,000 words from the core of the book about her affair with Picasso.
In his 20s, in the great period, as you see it, the great period
Yeah,
of his
they
life,
got together when they were each about 24 and broke up when they were each about 31. And those 7 years were crucial because in those 7 years, he went from the Blue period to the Rose period to Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and then into Cubism. So it's an extraordinary march. It's Napoleonic in its boldness, you know, except that with the difference that he didn't have to retreat from Moscow.
When I read the translation from it, for the first time in your book, she came over quite unexpectedly from the way I'd thought about her and reckoned her before.
That was the part that interested me the most, because she was more sophisticated than he was. She'd been a model for a few years. She'd had quite a few lovers. Then along came Picasso, and 1 year after they first met, their affair really started. It started on opium. He introduced her to opium. She adored it. She wrote beautifully about opium, about how much it gave her, how sweet it was, how tender it was, how much she loved Pablo, what an awful headache it gave her the next day. And she had much more sophistication in a way that he did. His sexual sophistication had come in brothels. And he'd had some mistresses, certainly, quite a few indeed for a young man his age, but he didn't have high-level mistresses. You see, she was high-level for him, and so that part of it is absolutely fascinating because it's one of the few examples that you have in detail of Picasso not as the superior lover, the man who would come in, love a girl, and leave her, but on the contrary, where he's beseeching her in effect.
He's a supplicant in a way, isn't he?
A supplicant, that was the word I was looking for.
And his jealousy is fantastic. I mean, when he goes out down street to get a croissant, he locks her in the flat.
Yes.
He literally, and takes the key with him.
Yes. What's there going to be in Andalusian if you can't be passionately jealous? And he adored her, and he knew how promiscuous he was, and he was prodigiously promiscuous, and he knew that she was essentially the same. And I think they also had orgies, and there was nothing in their moral precepts at that point in their life that would have forbid it. And so it's possible he'd had the experience of seeing her making love to other men, and that intensified his jealousy.
She's there, as you've said, this woman, through this great, you describe it as a Napoleonic march forward. We have the great Blue period, we have the Rose period, we're into Cubism, we have the Demoiselles d'Avignon. It is extraordinary surge of potency and achievement. And she's there all the time. So what's she giving him?
Well, for him, a woman was a universe. You know, he's much hated now. It's fashionable now to say he was a misanthrope, a misogynist, that he that he was vile about women, that he hated women. That's much too cheap a view of it. Women were a universe to him. And a universe is filled with good and evil, with extraordinary beauty and abominable pits of ugliness and viciousness. And he'd see all of that in women. He'd see them at their noblest, he'd see them at their most awful. And what characterized it, though, because he had his own cruelty in all this, is the longer he lived with a woman, generally speaking, the crueler he became in portraying them. For instance, with Fernand, the pictures he did of her, the portraits he did of her, moved from the sort of lovely portraits at the beginning of their affair, and then the fabulous paintings in the Rose period of her, where she's so lovely. Then 2 years later, 3 years later, he's painting her where you can't tell her from a bridge. It's a Cubist bridge. And she's there at the beginning of Cubism, looking immensely ugly. And she had to hate that tendency in him. She wrote very well about how she felt that he really was a classical painter like Ingres.
A repressed classicist, she called him. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not a bad insight, actually.
Yeah, she saw him as a repressed classicist,
right.
but that would really have, nobody would have taken him seriously if he showed what a virtuoso he was. So instead, he looked for everything he could do was ugly.
Destroy, yeah.
That he took away his talents, he wouldn't show how well he could draw. This is the way she saw it. And it's very French, the way she sees it, because it's terribly clear. It analyzes it perfectly, except she's probably 100% wrong.
Just to reinforce the idea of how rich a time this was in Picasso's life, in that same period, in his 20s, he discovered African art.
Yes.
And clearly that was very important for him. But you say it's hopeless to understand Picasso without comprehending that he was not only a painter, but a primitive hunter and a medicine man. And you relate that to the discovery of African art.
He went into an old museum.
The Trocadero.
And he saw all these African masks, and he looked at them, in a certain sense, he looked at them for the first time. And he said he was terribly frightened, and at the same time, he felt, I understand these masks. I know them very well. They are intercesseurs. In other words, they intercede for us. They are there to hold off the demons and the evil gods that attack us. And he said, we don't believe in that, and yet we do, and I believe in that. And that seemed to me when I saw these masks, that is what I've been doing all my life, is I too am an intercessor. I've been making my paintings in order to hold off evil forces visiting us. Now these are not, I paraphrase his words, but this is very close to what he was saying.
Yeah.
And it gives you a sense, you see, of the intensity with which he would work at times. In other words, he would look at something and it was wrong. There was something there that was open. Something awful could come through that space in the picture, and so he would have his brush and maybe he'd feel the move had to be this way, not this way, to hold off that force. And so his paintings, along with everything else, and this anticipates abstract expressionism in a profound way, his paintings were a reflection of what he was feeling at the moment in terms of living with his dread and how to hold off the dread. As he did a certain kind of brushstroke, the dread lessened. If he'd made another kind of brushstroke, it was an error, the dread increased. He was living very close to something that was external to himself. Now, in certain people, that's madness. In other people, it's high art. It depends exactly on how close you're willing to live to at the edge of that dread and do something about it. You see, the difference between a madman and an artist at that extreme point is that the madman gives up and opens the gates to the dread, whereas the artist says, no, I will contain the dread. I will divert it. I'm fighting a war against dread.
One of the paintings, there are many paintings he did in this early period that you write about, which became a painting which almost trumpeted the beginning of the 20th century, was Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Began as, I think it was called El Bordello. It began as the brothel, didn't it?
Yeah.
And he used the African masks there on the faces of the women. And you talk about the two halves of the painting and the gap in the middle and so on. And in a way, you regard it as a failure.
Well, I do. Well, that's sacrilege. That's heresy. Les Damoiselles d'Avignon is considered one of the great paintings of the 20th century. And indeed it is, if what we ask of greatness is that it represent an upheaval, a change in the Earth's crust. So Les Damoiselles d'Avignon did exactly that. It was an upheaval in the crust of the art world. And the art world was never the same after Les Damoiselles d'Avignon. But this is over the decades. This is not immediately, because Picasso kept the picture hidden for many, many years.
Literally turned it to the wall for many years.
And well, you know, I think I know enough about him to know if he turns a painting to the wall and doesn't want you to see it, then there's a very good chance that he too considers it a failure. First of all, it was a painting. He started it with a set of attitudes. He started it with a set of attitudes that altered. It started off as going to be one kind of painting. And then he saw those African masks. And then he started putting them into the picture. So you've got faces that are drawn in one style, and then you've got faces that are drawn in another style altogether. You've got the anticipations of Cubism in the middle of the picture.
In the middle is
And, but it was an extraordinarily bold effort. But part of his reason in the beginning was simply competitive. Everyone was talking about how wonderful Matisse was. Matisse was the most exciting avant-garde painter around. And here's Picasso saying, what about me?
Had Matisse just done Le Bonheur de Vivre?
Yes, yeah. And there's Picasso hanging on the vine. What about me? So, all right, I'm going to show them. I'm going to do something that goes far beyond Matisse. This will be absolutely beyond anything Matisse ever dreamed of. And he got a very expensive canvas that was about 8 feet by 8 feet, prepared it, primed it, and started working on it. And then all hell bust loose, because in the middle of it he sees these African masks. He begins to see that his work has got more dimensions to it than he'd ever thought. He doesn't know quite where he's going. He's floundering. He doesn't know that Cubism is ahead for the next 4 years. He was going to have 4 years of this where he never knew what he was doing from stroke to stroke almost, because there was no name for it. You couldn't speak about what he was doing. It was too abstract. It was too far into the Empyrean, if you will. It was as if he was flying without a motor up in space. And so the painting, yes, Les Damoiselles d'Avignon, in my mind, is a failure. And it's a damn repellent painting. I mean, I think part of the comedy of modern art is people see it in museums, they look at it, they nod seriously as they look at it. They're told it's a great painting, and they say, yes, that's a great painting. They don't have a clue why it's a great painting, and they don't dare to say to themselves, I know what I like, and I don't like that. Or they do say it, and they're Philistines. But actually, it's great because it opened the way. But I don't think it's great in and of itself. I still think it's a damn ugly picture.
Now, you give a lot of your book's authority to Picasso, with Braque, of course, but we're talking about Picasso here. Picasso's engagement with discovery of adventure through Cubism. That, for you, is the great thing, is the greatest thing, is the thing that marks him as the truly great artist, although there's everything around as well. Why is it so important, do you think, to your assessment of him, that he went through the Cubist adventure?
Well, it's more than just an assessment of him. I think that was his greatest period as a painter. And I think he had discoveries there that were incredible, that have affected everything in modern painting ever since. But it was more than that. There's no understanding of Picasso unless you realize that the man's ambition was larger than, you have to think of people, and in no other way was Picasso like Hitler. But you have to think of, there's an ambition that's equal to Hitler's ambition or Stalin's ambition. He had an immense ambition. And here at the 1905, 1906, there was a group at that time. In fact, it was called, later it was called the Bande Picasso, the Picasso gang. And Apollinaire was a large part of it, and a few others. And Apollinaire was always fortifying Picasso's ego, because Apollinaire thought there was nothing more important on earth than painting and poetry, that they were going to make the revolution. They were going to change everything in existence. They were going to get rid of that awful society that sat over the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, that hideous bourgeois society. They, as artists, were going to overcome all this. And so now suddenly everyone's talking about Einstein, talking about how brilliant he is, how he's a genius, how he's going to change the nature of everything with his theories on relativity.
Fourth dimension.
Yes, the fourth dimension. And Picasso's attitude has to be, what about me? What about me? I've been changing the nature of everything for a long time now. I believe in that I know more about the nature of existence than this Einstein. Now, this is all speculation on my part, mind you, but to me it makes absolute sense given his immense competitiveness. And no one paints to the age of 91, working hard every day of their lives practically, and amasses an immense body of work, 15,000 works or whatever, without having this prodigious ambition. So Picasso thought, I will outdo Einstein in my way. I will enter the fourth dimension through painting. And this is my argument. It wasn't that he saw his work as relativity, or that he understood relativity, or he was trying to explain relativity. It was that he saw that beneath the world of appearances, there might be possible to bring together a way in which you could meld still lifes, landscapes, figures, urbanscapes, that is cities. You could put it all together into one painting, possibly, and do that in painting after painting, where you were showing the interrelations of reality. And in his mind, I really believe he saw it as the equivalent of what Einstein was doing. Einstein was collapsing space and time into one entity. So he was going to collapse three dimensions into one dimension that was now like a fourth dimension. And Cubism is this exploration into a way of finding a new means of recording reality. And so when you look at these Cubist pictures, if you look at them closely enough in a museum, if you spend 10, 15, 20 minutes looking at one Cubist picture, you'll begin to see all sorts of things in it. You'll begin to see how there's a city. You're looking at a city. You're looking at the inside of a body in an autopsy. You're looking at the figure of a man, or you're looking at the figure of a woman.
I mean, that seems to me to be a very fine survey of Cubism. Why is it so important for you that Picasso did it? Are we using words like radical or revolutionary? What can you just give it?
Why is it important for me?
Yeah, why is it important for you?
For a venal reason, which is that I'm the one who saw this. Everyone else writes about Cubism as if, it has to do with the intersection of the planes, or it has to do with this or with that. One of his dealers, who's a Conweiler, wrote about how Cubism was a new form of signs. In other words, and I don't want to get into it because it's a long theory and I don't believe a bit of it. They just simply weren't taking what Picasso was trying to do. Picasso was trying to say, painting is as great as science. Painting can tell us as much about the universe as science. And he was not trying to say, I'm interested in the intersection of planes to show you how a plane can go forward or backward. I don't think painters think that way. I think painters are somewhere between, how to put it? Painters are working with what they're doing. They're not thinking in the terms that art critics bring to it. So that part of my pleasure in Cubism is I thought, finally someone has come along who has something new to say about Cubism, and the most attractive side of all this is that I'm the person who's saying it.
One of the incidents which you think affected Picasso profoundly was the theft of the Mona Lisa from the Louvre, in which he became implicated. And because of that implication, he did something terrible. He betrayed his greatest supporter and perhaps one of his best friends. And you follow that through in the effect it had on his life.
Well, I think that, many of us go through a moment in our life that we can speak of afterwards. That was the worst moment in my life. Almost always when we speak of that, we think of a moment of great shame. It doesn't have to be a large episode, it can be the smallest episode, but what we're filled with is a shame at how we behaved, that it's awful, and we never quite get over it. And I think that worst moment for Picasso, and this is my novelist's guess, came with the theft of the Mona Lisa. What happened, it's a very complicated story, so I'll just try to summarize it quickly. The Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre in 1911. In 1908, I think, or 1909, a man who'd been secretary to Apollinaire had stolen a couple of small busts, pieces of Iberian sculpture from hundreds of years old, centuries old, and had sold them to Picasso. And Picasso had some instinct that this was very dangerous stuff, and he wrapped them up and put them away in a closet. Then the Mona Lisa was stolen. Picasso had the feeling that before long they might be implicated. That
Because
somehow,
these two things had been stolen from the Louvre as well. Yeah.
There was some connection in his mind that the two might be put together.
Yeah.
And maybe the same man had stolen this one too, that sort of thing. And he was in a panic. And Apollinaire was in a panic. And they took the two heads that Picasso had all these years, put them in a suitcase, they wandered around all night. Each of them was absolutely, had lost his head. They came back, they didn't know where to throw it. They were afraid to throw it into the Seine for fear they'd be spotted while they were throwing it in and arrested. And they came back after lugging these two heavy stone heads, exhausted in the morning. Fernand Olivier describes it, how they both were pathetic, how she had contempt for them. They were such abominable criminals. They were so cowardly. They were so timid. They were so nervous. Then Apollinaire got arrested a couple of days later because the word was out that he knew something about it. And he was accused of being implicated in the theft. 2 days later, Picasso was brought in. He folded completely when he saw Apollinaire.
By the police, who's brought him
The
up.
police were asking him, do you know this man? He said, no, I do not know this man. I've never seen him. Now, here's Picasso, who's proud of himself. He's an anarchist. He hates society. He's superior to society. He's contempt for the police. And he's craven when finally push comes to shove. So it's probably the most awful moment of his life. And in fact, he even mentions it. 50 years later, he mentions it in passing to someone, that this was a terrible moment in my life, and I wasn't really very good in relation to good Apollinaire and so forth. Well, Apollinaire is finally let out, and they realize that he's not involved in the theft, and he's exculpated, but he's profoundly humiliated by it. Apollinaire was an immensely proud man. He was the representative of poetry. He embodied poetry the way Hemingway embodied machismo. It was if Hemingway had been a public coward, machismo would have taken a fall. Apollinaire felt that now poetry, and everything he stood for in poetry, is the revolutionary force and the human spirit, had been denied by this arrest, this humiliating arrest. He and Picasso were cooler for the rest of their lives. They reformed the friendship, but it was never the same. And I think this shame lived in Picasso. I think it could be traced. He leaves about 6 months later analytic cubism, which was the most ambitious venture he had in cubism, and a more superficial version that they call synthetic cubism came into being. It was pretty, it was decorative. Half the houses in the Western world are now decorated with the palette of synthetic cubism, wonderful pastels. As I say, it was pretty. And from there, he went into less and less for many years. You can almost follow the decline. He went into the ballet. Well, this is not to denigrate ballet, but for someone who had been as serious as Picasso, was changing the nature of the universe, to start designing ballet sets is not of the same order and high purpose. And it was as if he was lost. He couldn't find himself. It would probably 10 to 15 years went by before he was doing serious, groundbreaking, innovative work again. So I think this is the trauma of his life, was the time when he ratted on Apollinaire. And I was lucky enough to find a picture of him, which is one of the worst photographs you'll ever see of Picasso. He looks just like a prison rat at that point. He's informed on his best buddies, and he looks at, he's sunken, he's cheap, he's vile. And it's all in the photograph.
Yeah. And you really think that from the age of 31, you see either a decline and then a plateau in Picasso?
A decline, a plateau, and then he goes up again and starts doing interesting work again. And of course, there are new monuments. There's Guernica, which is extraordinary painting. It isn't as if he never did any other good work. There are the incredible portraits he does of women for many, many years. There's all sorts of wonderful work, but I don't think he ever reaches that high level where, as Braque once put it, they were strapped together like mountaineers on a mountain ledge.
What about the women? Do you think the women influence his work? Because the women, it's 7 real, you could say, affairs, stroke marriages, and many more in between. There is one idea, I've heard it, that the 7 main women in Picasso's life, and these are 7 different periods in Picasso's painting life. Do you see
there's
this?
no doubt of that at all. Women to him each woman was like a foreign country. You know, if a painter traveled through 7 countries in the course of his or her life, and they had 7 different styles, you say, yes, it was the country he was in. Yeah. Well, in this case, it was the woman he was in, literally. Because no one was ever more serious about women. I mean, he loved them, he adored them, he also despised them, he hated them, and he understood women very well by the end of his life. He understood not only everything that was extraordinary about women, but everything was awful. And women, after all, from the point of view of men, women are an immense mystery. And he went as far into penetrating the nature of that mystery as any artist I know.
There's last drawings and that he did towards the end of his life about women and concentrating on the vagina. I mean, the obvious reason there's creation and so. Turner, who I think was in his way as prodigious as Picasso,
Yes.
at the end of his life drew vaginas.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Ruskin. Ruskin burnt them. He was in charge of Turner's estate and burnt them. But we know he did it.
That's what you call a low bastard.
Yeah, in his own brothel down in Wapping, which Turner had. And but he did this, and it's interesting that both of them go to that in the end. Is that the obvious? Is there more than the obvious, that it's to do with creation, that it's to do with that mystery that they came out of, and so on?
No, I think you said it.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't go beyond that. We each discover on our own that a vagina is the most interesting object to examine. And Picasso just thought that was a major principle in life. He was absolutely fascinated with the way a girl could have a wonderful, sweet, innocent face and a vast maw of a vagina, and women with evil faces could have tiny flower-like pussies, or you could have the ugly woman with the ugly other end, and the same beautiful girl with the fine flower between her thighs. All of that. He was absolutely fascinated with this, that the fact that it was always that there were two people in a woman. And one was the face and the other was the vagina. And the vagina was a face more complex even than the upper face, because it could look like a forest glen. It could look like a wound. It could look like a battlefield after the carnage. It could look like anything. And so he would go ahead and draw these things, and they're extraordinary.
Do you think the reputation of his erotic paintings has suffered because of political correctness of the last 2 or 3 decades?
Well, I mean, there's a great deal of suffering because of political correctness. It's sort of a blight. It's like the Day of the Locusts. It's Stalinoid. It's Sovietism in the West. And this idea that there's a proper thing you can talk about and a proper thing you can't. Everything depends not on subject but on taste, on style, on attack on reality. They're cutting out the attacks on reality. Political correctness is just part of something that's trying to put us into the computer. Well,
Picasso has got nothing. I mean, he bursts out all over that, doesn't he? He offends all over the place.
Prodigiously incorrect.
Yeah. Yes. You seem to imply, partly what you were saying, that the best art confronts mortality. And an image you often return to is the artist looking over a precipice, and that is literally a scene in your book about Picasso. Staring death in the face seems important to you, and you found that also in Picasso.
But it's different. Picasso had a huge fear of death, which grew more intense as he grew older. So that the unhappiest aspect of his life for me is that when he's very, very old, when he's 90 and 91, just before he dies, he paints a portrait of himself as a very old man. And this old man is absolutely riddled with terror. And it's shocking, the picture. You say to yourself, here's a man, if any man had a right to say, I'm going to lay down my brush, I'm going to lie back, I'm going to die peacefully. I have worked for 84 of the last 91 years. You'd think it would be Picasso, but it isn't. He's still terrified of death. He's still holding it off. He's still trying to propitiate death. I mean, why would someone paint a portrait of themselves that ugly if it wasn't to exculpate their soul, to say, see, God, I have even a worse view of myself than you do. And that, again, is one of the marvelous contradictions in Picasso, which is this avowed atheist was so profoundly religious, would never admit it to himself. It just stands out in almost everything he says and does. I mean, he's in this war with God. He's terrified of God because he feels he was trying to uncover the secrets of God, you see. He's Faustian, Picasso.
You talk about Picasso's soul. Do you think he had a relationship with his soul?
Oh, yes. I think he had an intense relationship with his soul, although he wouldn't have used the word. To repeat, he was an atheist, so he wouldn't have believed necessarily in soul, but everything he does, everything he talks about, whenever he is at all revelatory in what he says, it's obvious that he thinks there's a God there. He thinks that God is angry at him for good cause. Because there he is. He's trying to uncover the secrets of this God. I mean, to him, form offered revelations into the secrets of the universe. Cubism is built upon this exploration into form. What is the nature of form? How can you change form? In what ways can one form become another form? I truly believe that he felt that form was one of the ways in which the Lord showed us the nature of the universe, there for us to discover or not to discover. On the other hand, he was willing to use every dirty trick he could to get into the nature of that universe, and so he lived in fear of God, fear of his own soul.
Finally, the book received a certain amount of flack in America from the art establishment.
No, let me
rephrase that. The book received a great amount of flack in America from the art establishment. So what was going on there?
Well, I think I violated a few canons of the art establishment, and one of the things I certainly did do is, you know, as I said, the art establishment is burying Picasso with their jargon. And that's a slap in the face to the art establishment. And then, most curiously, the key reviews were by art critics. And art critics are the last people in the world I would want to review this book. So in that sense, I'd say I probably received worse reviews on this book in America than anything I've written since my second book, Barbary Shore. And what's odd about it is, as you can tell from the way I'm talking about it, I'm fond of this book. I like it. That is, for me, I think it's, you know, if I've written 30 books, if I have 10 that last, I'm convinced this is going to be one of them. So, you know, you shrug. If you live with your reviews, you're a dead man.
Do they influence you?
Do they influence me? Yeah. They influence my wallet prodigiously. But no, they don't. Most bad reviews are just an exercise of a mean-spirited human being's ego. Really, I can tell some of them should be punched out.
Well, thank you very much.
We hope you've enjoyed Mailer on Picasso. Did US intelligence forces really use psychics for high-level espionage during the Cold War? Find out in the extraordinary story of America's psychic spies, The Real X-Files, 9:30 tomorrow. Coming up, the late news.